How do you predict the size of the product in a word problem involving multiplication of fractions? For example, Earth's polar radius is 6,356 kilometers. The polar radius of Mars is 53/100ths that of Earth's. Which planet has a greater polar radius? In this lesson, you will learn how to solve word problems by comparing the size of the product to the size of the factors. In a multiplication equation, the two numbers being multiplied together are called factors, and the result is called the product. A common misunderstanding that many students have is thinking that the product in a multiplication equation is always going to be larger or greater than its factors. This is true when both factors are greater than 1. However, it is not always the case. The size of the product in a multiplication equation depends on the size of the factors. Based on our experience with multiplying by fractions, we can make several statements about the relationship between the size of the product and the size of the factors. For instance, when we multiply by a factor less than 1, the product will be less than the original factor. 12 times 3/4 equals 9. 3/4 is less than 1. Therefore, the product, 9, is less than the original factor, 12. When we multiply by a factor equivalent to 1, the product will be equivalent to the first factor. 12 times 4/4 equals 12. 4/4 is equivalent to 1, therefore the product, 12, is equivalent to the first factor, 12. And finally, when we multiply by a factor greater than 1, the product will be greater than the first factor. 12 times 6/4 equals 18. 6/4 is greater than 1, therefore the product, 18, is greater than the original factor of 12. Let's test that idea out in a real-world situation. River and Sage are building magnetic block towers. River used 54 pieces to build his tower. Sage used 7/4 as many pieces as River. Who used more magnetic pieces? River used 54 pieces, and Sage used 7/4 as many as River. So that means she used 54 times 7/4. That means the product will tell us how many pieces Sage used. We can solve this without performing any calculations. We know that 7/4 is greater than 1, which means that our product will be greater than our original factor, greater than 54. This means Sage used more than 54 pieces, so she used the most. Let's try another example. Ava and her mom spent their entire summer enjoying their favorite sport. They spent 35 days visiting ballparks and 5/5 as much time practicing pitching. Which did they spend more time doing? Okay, let's see. They spent 35 days visiting ballparks and 5/5 as much time practicing pitching, or 35 times 5/5. That means the product will tell us how much time they spent pitching. Again, we can solve this without performing any calculations. We know that 5/5 is equivalent to 1, which means our product will be equivalent to our original factor of 35. That means Ava and her mom spent the same amount of time visiting ballparks and practicing pitching. It's a tie. Let's revisit the problem from the beginning of this lesson. Earth's polar radius is 6,356 kilometers. The polar radius of Mars is 53/100ths that of Earth's. Which planet has a greater polar radius? Well, Earth's polar radius is 6,356 kilometers, and the polar radius of Mars is 53/100ths that of Earth's. So 6,356 times 53/100ths. That means the product will tell us the size of Mars' polar radius. We know that 53/100ths is much less than 1. In fact, it's very close to 1/2. That means that Mars has a polar radius that is less than our original factor, or less than 6,356 356. That means Earth has a greater polar radius, and Mars is only about half the size. In this lesson, you have learned how to solve word problems by comparing the size of the product to the size of the factors.